I'm very passionate about language. I don't really like to learn new languages, unfortunately, but I'm very interested in how language is processed from a cognitive perspective. So that's my background. Alex already mentioned that. And the title of this talk is also the hypothesis I want to argue for in this talk. It's the uniqueness of human language. So I want to argue that human language, especially the hierarchically organized complex language, is unique to humans. The topic is very broad and very big, and I could probably talk a whole semester about that. So I can only give you an overview during this session here. What do I plan for today? So there are no linguists here. I think we will start I thought it will be helpful to give you at the beginning a brief general overview of a language, its function and its properties. And then I will talk more about the human capacity for language and especially about syntax. And after that, we will compare that human language with the communication systems in the animal world. And finally, I will talk about the role of language in the Bible, and since I'm also a teacher, I will briefly talk about what this all means in the context of schools. Right at the moment, you're listening to me, and you probably understand what I'm saying, but you're probably not aware of the complexity and speed of this process. So when you listen to a sentence like this one,
on the Sunday afternoon, the little girl was drawing the old tree in the garden.
You try to understand what it means. However, physically, it is just a stream of sounds. It looks like that. So you see the acoustic waves. But how can we get a meaning out of this air or out of this acoustic signal? The first question is it language or is it just noise? Is it just a sound? And if it's language, which language is it? So, and then we have to identify the words and the phrases, because if you look at the waves here, you see there is no clear boundary between the words. The little is just one physical thing. Then you have to identify the phonemes. You need lexical access to get the meaning of the morphemes and the words. And then all the morphosyntactic processing takes place. You need the relationships between the words and the phrases. And you have to assign a meaning to the phrases and also to the sentences. And then you have to evaluate this meaning, and you have to plan what you want to respond to that, what you've heard. So this is a very complex process, and the most fascinating thing is that it happens in a very high speed. So the speaking rate is about 2 to 3 words per second. So this has to be done in a very high speed. If you look at some models here, I brought you this older model from Friedrichs and Level from 1988, but it nicely demonstrates the basic steps of language comprehension, which is on the right side, and language production on the left-hand side. And it shows the different steps that you have to make. So when the input arrives here, at your ear, it is first processed phonetically, and after that, a process called parsing takes place, and that's something I'm normally working with, a parsing process. For that, you need access to the lexical information, and you have to build up thematic and grammatical relations, something like the actor and the undergoer of an action. And you also have to access the syntactic word category, for example, if it's a noun or is it a verb. And you have to build phrase structures. So the words, some words are connected to each other. We will talk about that. I will go into more detail about that in a second. For all this, you need access to the lexicon and to the syntactic rules, to the grammar. And then you receive this post-verbal message, and you interpret this message. And for that, you also need world knowledge, you need the context, and all this is also monitored, and then you can start the production process. So I don't go into more detail here. So it's a very complex process, and you see that it's a very complex process if you meet people where language comprehension or production went wrong, or something where they have deficits. And some of these deficits come after brain injury or after stroke. I will just show you 2 examples. The first is the so-called Broca's aphasia. There, the ability to produce language is impaired. So I show you that.
Well, how are you doing today, Ken?
Okay.
Okay. Are you having pain anywhere?
No.
Feel pretty good in general?
Yeah.
You can understand what I'm saying to you, right?
Yes.
Can you close your eyes for me? Now tell me your name.
George.
Okay, there you see that he's not able to produce language. He can understand language, but he's not able to produce language. And there is another type of aphasia which is called the Wernicke's aphasia. And there the ability to grasp the meaning of spoken words and sentences is impaired. They can speak, but they don't understand the language.
Hi Byron, how are you?
I'm happy. Are you pretty? You look good.
What are you doing today?
We speak with the water over here at the moment and talk to the people over them over there. They're diving for them at the moment. But they'll save in the moment. He had water first and for him. With luck for him.
So we're on a cruise and we're about to
We will store it right here and they'll save their hands right there for them.
And what were we just doing with the iPad?
Okay, that's just the first short impression, what it means when language is impaired. And which shows that there is a lot of things going on that you are able to understand what I'm just talking, and you're also able to produce language. I will start with giving you some facts about human language. So the question is, what is human language? And the basic answer is language is a code system. So if you have a sender and he wants to transmit a message to the receiver, there is a possibility that he just uses an electrode from one brain to the other and directly transmits his thoughts. But that's not possible. You can't do that. So we have to encode our message into language, and the receiver has to decode this message. That's why we call it a code system, but we can also call it a sign system. And this idea was firstly introduced by the Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure in the 19th century. And he said that, so words are linguistic signs. And he also mentioned that the relationship between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary. So if you call that a table or if you call it a chair, both is possible. It's not the things don't have an inherent name of itself. So it's just by convention. And this also means that since we know that it's a code system, that the better both sender and receiver know the code system, which is the language, the better communication works. But that's not all we know about language. Language is but much more than a code system. It is also a complex hierarchical system. There was the idea of double articulation, which was proposed by 2 linguists. The one is Hockert and the other one is Martinet, about the same time. And they said, well, language uses a finite number of meaningless elements, sounds. Sounds don't have a meaning, and they use it, or the language uses these meaningless elements to produce an infinite number of meaningful elements. So for example, if you have k, e, t, these are meaningless elements, but you can combine that and you get cat. And this has a meaning because it's this animal, okay? So the second thing you have to know is that it's called recursion. And this is proposed to be the only component of language which is unique to humans by some authors. We will talk about that later. The capacity of language this means that the language has a capacity to nest structures within structures. So this enables the generation of an infinite number of sentences or expression using a finite set of rules and vocabulary. So if you have a sentence like, or a phrase like Sarah's cat, you can have Sarah's sister's cat and Sarah's sister's friend's cat. This is something like the Russian dolls. So put it all. And you see that language has an invisible structure. For example, if you have a green teacup, it can be a teacup which is green, or you can have a green tea and a cup for this green tea. And there's a difference in the structure behind these sentences. Also, it's much more than a communication system. So I just mentioned some functions here. Language has a cognitive function. So language is a medium for abstract thinking, for reasoning, for problem solving. It enables social interaction, and it maintains relationships. So you are able to transmit social norms, to talk about that, to talk about politeness, and to transmit it to the next generation, for example, and to build communities, because you also have texts which you can transmit from one generation to the next. It allows individuals to express their emotions and their desires and their intentions. You can transmit through language cultural values, beliefs, knowledge, and so on. And language also helps to describe abstract objects, events, or situations in the world, also in the past and in the future, which is very hard to do with some gestures only. So language provides the basis for almost everything that characterizes us as human beings. Yeah, you all know and probably experienced in the last days that it's not only one language in the world. So today we have about 7,000 living languages in the world, but roughly 44% of languages are now endangered. There are only a few speakers anymore, and it's very likely that they cannot pass this language to the next generation. And about all over this language, we have some universals, some absolute universals, something like that all languages can ask questions, all languages say who did what to whom. That's a very important thing for psycholinguistics, because we always try to see how a language expresses this function. They all combine sounds to create meaning and so on. Maybe you've heard something about Joseph Greenberg, who also proposed some language universals, something like in declarative sentences with subject and object, the dominant word order is one in which the subject precedes the object. But now we know that there are exceptions for almost all of these universals, so we just call them strong tendencies. And many researchers also propose that the recursion in syntax, what I've just mentioned, is a universal. So that is universal for all languages. Despite these great universals, we also have great variation in human language. For example, if you look at the order of subject, object, verb, you can see that you have here the first two ones where the subject precedes the object, but you also have these ones here at the bottom where you have where the object precedes the subject. So there are very different kinds of structures in the sentence, in the grammar and in the languages, or the number of cases. As you know, German has 4 cases, Latin has 6 cases. You have many languages have no case marking, but other languages have up to 10 or more cases in the language. So there's a great deal of variation in the languages. Now I want to talk about the human capacity for language. Some of you probably have children, or at least watch children when they learn languages. And this is very fascinating because children show an absolutely incredible ability to learn languages. Every child without impairments is able to learn every language in the world. So as long as sufficient input is provided, you can put a child from Germany to China, and the parents are not able to speak Chinese, but if the child receives enough input in Chinese, he will learn Chinese. And children can learn multiple languages simultaneously on a high competence level. Children can learn language automatically. You don't have to set them in schools, or they don't need explicit instruction. They get them afterwards, but for the normal language skills, they don't need that. And language is not only imitation. It is imitation, but not only. It's rule-based, and there's this very famous experiment from Berko dates back to the 1958, where she did this very cool experiment, and she asked children to fulfill or to say the plural of this fantasy words. It's a wak, and the children all said there are two waks. They've never heard this word before, but then Berko was able to show that the children just apply the rule. They apply the rule that you can use the S as a morpheme to mark the plural in English. Children are able to derive grammatical rules from the input. They can do that. And this all describes the learnability problem of language. So the linguistic input is limited and often incomplete. Then the question arises, where does the full grammatical system come from? And the second problem is, from the input, children may learn which structures are grammatical, but not which structures are ingrammatical or ungrammatical, because there's often no explicit error correction. And we all often use ungrammatical structures in everyday uses. There's also, you probably have experienced that, and we were just talking about that language, learning a language at a later age is much more difficult. So it's much easier when you are a child. And there seems to be a critical period for language acquisition. And this is especially true for syntax. So if you look at this old data from 1996, you see that for semantics, here you see the age. They can get a high level of competence if they start at the age of 11. So after 16, you get trouble, but before that, you're fine. But for syntax, you see that even in the age of 4, you'll already get difficulties to reach the same level of syntactic competence as the first. Syntax is the structures of sentences, so the grammar, and semantics is the meaning of words and of phrases. No. Okay. Then we will have a closer look to the processing of syntax, because this is the most important thing in this area. You probably heard something about Noam Chomsky. He is the most famous linguist in the last 70 years. He's still alive. He's, I think, 97 years old. So he's, very old now. And his idea was that since children show that incredible, fascinating ability to learn languages, there must be some kind of universal grammar. And this seeks to explain the innate aspects of human language acquisition. So what does this mean? He proposes that children have an innate linguistic capacity. So every child is born with an inherent ability to acquire language. And this capacity, and this is important, is hardwired into the brain. All human languages share a common structural basis, so a set of principles, and you can divide principles from parameters. So, for example, if you have a subject-drop language with its, for example, Italian is a subject-drop language because you don't have to express the subject in a pronoun. You can say canto, I sing. In German, you can't do that. You have to say ich singe. And so it's proposed that if a child receives the input and it says, okay, is it a pro-drop, subject-drop language or not? And then it sets the swift to the up or to the down. So say yes or no. And so this is what's meant by the parameters. Also, the universal grammar accounts for the speed and uniformity with which children acquire language, because it's very similar across languages. And it accommodates the human ability to generate an infinite number of sentences from a finite set of elements and rules, particularly through recursive structures within language. So this part of recursion is very important. The generative grammar, or the universal grammar, is a very complex grammar and with a lot of rules. And it's very hard to explain why humans have the innate universal grammar and animals don't. So this is a problem for all people who think that you have to explain the human abilities from the animal abilities. And it was impossible to explain the existence of universal grammar in evolutionary terms in this very complex form of the universal grammar. And that's why Chomsky and his colleague Berwick proposed this so-called minimalistic program. And in this program, they reduced the whole grammar to just one single operation. And this is the most important operation, and it is called merge. So merge is a recursive operation, and that takes two syntactic objects and forms an unordered set. So this is the formula if you have alpha and beta, and it combines it to one alpha and beta. For example, if you have a sentence like the boy met a girl, and you have this hierarchical structures, and you see that there are always two elements combined to a higher phrase. So, for example, and girl, the determiner and the noun are combined to a noun phrase, and then you get the verb, and this is combined to the verbal phrase, met a girl, and so on. So this is a very important thing, and merge is thought to be the only generative engine of human language, and it is claimed to be the only new function necessary for language to evolve from the already existing capacities. And it's also important that it is claimed to be encoded in the genes. So they just reduced all this and said, okay, the only thing that which really distinguishes animals from humans is merge. So that's why we are all looking for merge. I've just mentioned that the universal grammar proposes that merge has a neurobiological component, and that is why we would expect to find and locate this operation in the brain. Here I show you the development of the language network. It's also an older figure, but it's, for our purposes, it's great. So language is primarily processed in the left hemisphere of the brain, and it's processed along this temporal and frontal areas of the brain. The temporal area here includes the Wernicke's area, which I already mentioned in the Wernicke's aphasia, which he had in the beginning. So people with a Wernicke's aphasia have some deficits here in this area. And then it goes to the frontal areas, where the analysis of syntactic and semantic relations takes place. And here the core syntax processing, which we call merge, is assumed to take place in the Brodmann area 44, which is here. So we have already heard about the Brodmann area 44. It's the Broca's area, and the Broca's area, we've heard that in the Broca's aphasia. So they have deficits here in this area. And what you see on the bottom is that the development of syntactic skills so it's number 7 here. It needs a long time to be established, and it's not even finished by the age of 10. So it's a long time. Now I want to go to the communication system in the animal world. We have learned something about the communication system in the human, for the humans, but now we go to the animal world. You probably know that many animals use communication systems as well, like dolphins or bees or something like that, some animals like that. And many of them are very fascinating, and they are pointing to a great creator, I think. But here I will focus on only 2 species, the songbirds and the monkeys. And we will see how they fit into the picture, if they have language as we know what in our definition what language is, or if they don't have that. We'll start with songbirds. So there are over 5,000 different songbird species, and each likely with a different song. So it's amazing how many songs they have. And these songs are hierarchically structured. So they have some kind of notes, syllables, phrases, single songs, and vocal cycles. And that's why it's called phonological syntax, because of this structure. Just to give you a few examples, the common nightingale has about 180 to 180 different songs, which it uses. And the brown treasure, which is called in German the Rotspott-Drossel, has about 1,800 different songs. And in another study, they found more than 2,000 songs in about 90 minutes. And they concluded that must include improvisations. So it may be that the songbirds, that the vocalization in some songbird species may be an open system, so that you have a permanent change due to improvisations or borrowing from other species, or you also lose some of your songs. When you talk about this phonological syntax, you have 2 different types of syntax. The first is the linear syntax. That means that the order of performance of vocal components is fixed. It's always the same order. But you also have the combinatorial syntax, and this allows changes in the order of performance of vocal components. And some argue that this combinatorial syntax, so the ability to combine, you can compare it to the human ability to generate and understand an infinite number of utterances from a limited number of words, so that you have this comparison between these 2. But can we really compare these 2 syntax systems? So in 2022, Suzuki and Matsumata published a paper, and this is entitled Experimental Evidence for Co-Merge in the Vocal System of a Wild Passerine. This is a wild passerine. So what did they do? What was their idea? Their idea was that the operation merge can be broken down to an easy situation. You can have either, this is the version A, so you can either have one person saying, "Come talk," and then the listener interprets that as one unit with the meaning, "Come talk." But you can also have two persons, and the boy is saying come, and the girl is saying talk. And then you interpret that differently. So that was the idea. And they say for the first one, this is merge, and this isn't merge. And they call it co-merge, and they define it as combining two units into one without recursion. And then they had they conducted an experiment where they had passerines listen to a combination of an alert and a recruitment call. So they had the sequence, and it was either produced by one or by two different individuals. And they were able to show that the passerine recognized an alert recruitment call sequence by a single individual as a single unit, so as proposed for A, and not merely at two temporally linked calls. And they interpret that as evidence for co-merge. Okay, 2 years later, there was another paper, and it was a response to that paper. Here are some colleagues from the Netherlands. They gave it the title, No Evidence for Language Syntax in Songbird Vocalizations. They argued that Suzuki and Matsumoto adopted the ideas from Fujita, and Fujita splitted the operation merge into two single operations. The first is co-merge, which is just A and B give A, B. And the second is co-merge plus recursion, the recursive merge. And what the colleagues from Beckers and so on, what they said was, okay, recursion, that doesn't make sense to split into these two distinctions, recursion with and without, co-merge with and without recursion. They said recursion is a property of the rule system and not a separate cognitive property. So there's only a single unified merge operation, and this is recursive by definition. So that doesn't make sense to say that the the birds use this co-merge, because co-merge doesn't exist. It just exists with a recursion. So they interpreted the results that the alert recruitment call can be seen as one utterance, so that's okay. But this utterance is probably part of natural vocalization, and the results could imply a form of syntax, of course, in particular concatenation, so with a sensitivity to linear order, but it's not merge, what they call. So far, I will go to the next species, to the monkeys. I don't like this name, non-human primates, but okay, we just use it here as well. And of course, animals cannot produce language, and Andy will talk about that later, but they can learn signs, and they use them for communication purposes. They can use them for communication purposes. But if you compare children and monkeys, you see that children learn language easily and automatically, but apes don't. It's a lot of work that they learn how to use the signs. And this is a very old study from 1987, where a deaf child and a hearing child and a chimpanzee were compared in the number of utterances they produce. And you see here the age in years, and the length increases for the hearing and for the deaf child, but it's at the same level for the chimpanzee. So they don't get longer utterances; they just stay at the same level. Maybe you've heard something about this very famous chimpanzee. It's called Nim Chomsky, which is due to Noam Chomsky, and his advisor is Herbert Terrace, and he taught Nim 128 signs. And Nim was also able to produce these sequences of signs. But in an interview, and they published a paper on that in Nature and so on, and Terrace summarized that in an interview in 2019, and he said, Nim often got the signs right, but that was because his teachers inadvertently prompted him by making appropriate signs a fraction of a second before he did. Nim's signing wasn't spontaneous. He was unable to use words conventionally, let alone from sentences. So there is no evidence that he really used a form of syntax. If we talk about sentences and grammar, the question is what type of syntactic sequences can be learned. So he learned some sequences, but yeah, what is that? What kind of grammar is that? And we can distinguish between two different types of grammars. We have, on the one hand side, we have the finite state grammars. This is something like A, B, N rules, here in picture B, where you have the adjacent dependencies. And then you have the phrase structure grammars, which is here the lower picture. And there you have the A and B and rules. And this contains not adjacent dependencies. And the idea is that the second one, the phrase structure grammar, that this grammar requires the build-up of hierarchies, which is called merge. And Fitch and Hauser, who did a lot of research in this area, they concluded that humans could learn both grammars easily, both grammar types, but monkeys were only able to learn the finite state grammar with its adjacent dependencies. They were not able to learn the second type of grammar. And Friederici, in her famous book, Language in the Brain, she concluded, so far there's no evidence that any other species except humans can process and learn hierarchically structured sequences as they appear in the syntactic structures of natural languages. Okay, that was in 2017. And in 2022, there was another paper published by Hayashi and Takeshita, and it's called, or entitled, Hierarchical Object Combination and Tool Use in the Great Apes and Human Children. So their focus was also to answer the question, do great apes apply strategies that involve merge? And how did they test that? They just used three different types of cups, and they argue that there are at least three different strategies how you can combine these cups. So you can either put the smallest one, the blue one, in the yellow one. This is the first strategy. It's called pairing. You can also put the yellow one in the red one, and then you put the blue one in the red one. This is pot. And then the last strategy is you put the blue one in the yellow one, and you take this package and you put it in the red one. Okay, and they argue that this, the last one, this subassembly, that this is some kind of merge, because you have two items building a unit, and you use this unit to do something else. And they did an experiment with children from different ages, and they also observed a chimpanzee, and they gave them all the pots and observed what they were doing. And here the yellow part, this is this sub-assembly strategy. And what you see is here the chimpanzee on the right-hand side. You see that he also uses this sub-assembly strategy. So the authors concluded, well, if the chimpanzee obviously uses this strategy, so he can use this operation of merge. But actually, I'm not sure if this is really merge, because it had nothing to do with communication. It has nothing to do with using signs for another thing. So I really doubt that this is really merge. But okay. You can also see, we just talked about the different operations and merge and so on, but research has also shown huge neuroanatomical differences between humans and non-human primates. So if you compare the brains of humans and monkeys, you see that the connectivity is very different, and especially from the temporal to the frontal areas. So the connections in the human brain are much better than in the monkey's brain, and this allows the humans to process language, because you need all the connections to process, to get the information from one place to another. And also, it's shown that the Broca's area, which is, I remind you, it's over here, it's much smaller in the monkey's brain than in the human's brain, and there's much less connectivity. Okay, so far, that's what I want to mention with regard to the human capacities for language and the communication system in the animal world. But I also want to tell you something about God's communication system, because that's the one we didn't talk about before. And I found it very interesting how God communicates to us. You've probably noticed before that language plays a very important role all over the Bible. And I will just mention 5 aspects that I found very interesting. The first is God uses language to create things. You always have this expression, and God said in Genesis. But to whom? Language aims in opposite, as we've seen. And God is, this points to the fact that God is 3 in 1. He is a we, and he embodies a relationship in his self. So that's why Genesis 1:26 said, let us make mankind. A second thing is that God creates humans who can use language in a very powerful way. In Genesis 2:20, he said, the man gave names to all the livestock. So that's not just names. It's more than names, because the names are connected to the properties the animals have. So it's a creativity. And this creativity is a reflection of God's creativity. And also from the very beginning, humans have had the ability to speak. So we already read in Genesis 2:23, the man said. So he was able to speak. That was not something that appeared later. So it was from the beginning. Third point, God talks to humans, and humans can talk to God. I find that very fascinating, that God talks to humans. For example, in Genesis 3:9, but the Lord God called to the man, where are you? So there was a communication. And this, I will remind you that language enables communication, and communication enables relationship. It is the basis for relationship. So this already shows us that God is interested in a relationship. And also it's very interesting that both parties use the same code system. So they have an idea of how to communicate because they know the code. And this also points to the fact that humans are made in the image of God, because they have the same code system. And also, a thing I mentioned earlier, the better the relationship, the better the communication works, because both parties share the same code system, and you probably experienced that with God as well. That this is a relationship that has to grow. And it's interesting that God does not talk to animals, but that God wants us to talk to him. For example, we read, call on me on the day of trouble. So this language it's a basis for everything, and it plays a very important role all over the Bible. Number 4, Jesus is the Word of God. So this is the beginning of John. In the beginning was the Word, which is the Greek word logos, which is much more than a word. And this Word was with God, and the Word was God. Why is it translated as Word? Because Jesus is a message from God. He is part of God's communication system, so to say. I give you a few verses on that. For the one whom God has sent speaks the word of God, in John 3:34. A man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. He gave it to us. For I did not speak on my own, but the Father who sent me commanded me to say all that I have spoken. And in Hebrews, this very famous verse, in the past God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets and at many times and in various ways, but in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son. So this is God's communication system thus. And the last point is God reveals himself through the Bible, through language, through scripture. So in John 5:39, these are the very scriptures that testify about me. We don't have an oral tradition, we have a written tradition, and it is based on a book. Our beliefs are based on a book. And in Revelation, it's said to John, write therefore what you have seen. So he explicitly gets the task to write down what he's seen. So for me, as humans, we are made for, this becomes clear, we are made for language because language enables communication with God, and this in turn enables relationship with God. Good. Finally, since I'm also a teacher, Alex mentioned that in the beginning, I will now briefly show you some implications of that for the schools and what this means for pupils and teachers. I can talk about that much more, but for here I will just briefly mention a few things. As you have seen so far, language is a very powerful tool, but it is also very dangerous, especially if you use it for the wrong purposes. I give you one example to illustrate what I mean. So young people in particular primarily use social media to obtain information. Here's a statistic from Germany, and you see for the age of 14 to 29 years, there are almost 37% who use primarily social media to obtain information. An additional 38% use it together with other information sources. This is more than 2/3 of this generation uses social media to obtain information. So is this a problem? I would say yes, it is a problem, because what kind of information do they find in social media? Here are some recommendations, because the social media posts are often brief and simplistic. So look at these recommendations, and you see that the ideal length of a social media post is about 100 characters for an X post, post on X. And it's also a maximum, and the videos on TikTok have a maximum of 21 to 24 seconds. So it's very short. And I think this is a problem, because our world is not simple, not that simple. Simplicity often shows, it says, well, you have easy answers. It's not such a problem, but sometimes, and in many cases, it is a problem. The world is not simple, and if we argue that the world is simply, then simplicity often harbors the risk of populism. So to develop an informed position, you need access to reliable information, and this process can be exhausting, and it can be time-consuming. It can only be mastered with strong language skills, because you have to read and comprehend complex texts. So young people have to learn to read long and complex texts, and they have to learn to stay focused for a long time. If we just reduce everything to 100 characters, they are not used to learn the language in the way that it mentioned to be. Also, it's also true from a Christian perspective. So we need language skills to read the Bible. And Christianity is a book-based religion. I found this very interesting statistics also from Germany. It's about the number of books at home. The number of books is also a very good predictor for language skills, by the way, so we always use it. And the results are given for religious and non-religious people. And what you see that the religious people have much, I don't know if you can see that, not here, okay. You see here the religious people on the right-hand side and the non-religious people on the left hand and the religious on the right hand. And you see that this is for Protestants, this is for Catholics, this is for Muslims, and this is for other religions. And for the others, there are also evangelical Christians in this category, okay? And if you look closer, you see that all the religious people have more books at their homes compared to the non-religious people. This is true, especially for the Protestants and the others, so the evangelical Christians, but it is not true for the Muslims here in this area. So I found this very interesting because it shows that Christianity is a book-based religion. So our faith is based on a book. And that's also why our thinking is based on texts and why we have to practice that, and also for the younger generation. Okay, that's it. I would just conclude. Linguistic evidence shows that, or points to the fact that the ability to produce and to comprehend complex, hierarchically organized language is unique to humans, as far as we know. And it suggests that this ability can hardly be explained in evolutionary terms. There are some ideas, but I can give a talk about that in another session, but it's, or another ELF, but it's not easy. So there is not really a convincing theory how this can be done or explained. And linguistic evidence also shows that language is a code system and that the use of this code system has to be trained. The Bible tells us that humans are created with the ability to acquire complex language, which fits well to the innate language acquisition device proposed by Chomsky and colleagues. And it stresses the importance of language as a characteristic of humans, mirroring the characteristics of God. And I just mentioned two things here. Language enables relationships to other humans and to God. And language enables abstract thinking, reasoning, and problem solving, and it also provides the basis for our scientific work. So think about scientific work without language. It's impossible. And for me, the verse in Genesis 1:28, fill the earth and subdue it, it's not a good translation. I find it the very old one, make ye a subject. So understand the creation. I think that's very important and the basis for our scientific work.